In the previous video, we talked about structure. In this video, we're going to focus on discipline. Ask my students. I am hard in my class, but I do it in a loving way. I'm the eldest in my family. There was no talking back to my parents ever. Yes, sir, and yes, ma'am were the only acceptable answers. A yes led to a yes, what from my dad. All of my coaches were what you could describe as Old Testament style coaches. If you played football in the South, you know what I'm talking about. Before we get started, we should address a fundamental issue. Most people think disciplining is punishing kids for mistakes. While yes, there needs to be some type of punitive damages in certain instances, this is not what discipline is about. Discipline is about correcting before you get to the point of punishing, and I will address that first. In order to understand correcting, you need to start thinking along the lines of acceptable and unacceptable. Also, you need to think about the concept of acceptable or unacceptable as it pertains to your kids' futures. What will be an acceptable behavior for them as an adult? What will not be an acceptable behavior for them as an adult? Set these standards and work backwards from there. How can you start now to get to that point in the future? This is where you need to focus. When an unacceptable behavior or action occurs, it needs to be corrected in that moment to a behavior or an action that is considered acceptable. When your kid changes from the unacceptable behavior or action to something that is acceptable, then at this point, you need to give positive reinforcement. Noticing acceptable behaviors and actions when they happen is also a great tool for correcting without actually having to correct. Now let me explain. One of the issues we focused on during training before the 2020 school year was focusing on good behaviors. It works. In my classroom, at any given point, there will most likely be students exhibiting both acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. In the past, I would always seem to focus on changing the unacceptable. This year, I purposefully started focusing more on the acceptable behaviors. I'm saying things like, good job, excellent work, or I like what you're doing, and then using the student's name. This draws attention to the good behavior or action because most kids want to feel included and to be affirmed. They will naturally change what they're doing to receive this recognition. Looking back, one of the great things my parents did was to never talk bad about us, at least not to us anyways. They never said things like, you are a. Instead, they would say things like, your behavior or you're acting like. It makes a huge difference. By phrasing corrections in this manner, you are placing emphasis on your kid's action or behavior, not your actual kid as a person. Now, we all know there will be times where some type of punishment is required. It sucks, but that's a fact. My only advice is to be firm but fair. Also, make sure it comes from a place of love, not out of anger. I know that sounds odd, but it's true. Do not, and I mean absolutely do not, punish your child if you are angry. Do whatever you have to do to calm down and then handle it. And remember, you're not punishing to punish. You're punishing as a form of correction, like a deterrent. When I was a child, most of the time I got an explanation before I got punished. For example, my parents were often like this with me. We told you that if you continued with this type of behavior or action, that this would be the consequence. Because you continued with this behavior or action, now we have to do this. Learning to respect authority and the concept of cause and effect as it pertains to breaking rules and laws is a valuable skill set that a lot of people do not have today. One final note about discipline. Please don't forget that your kids are just that, kids. They're probably bright and intelligent. I don't doubt that at all. But they're also just kids, and they still need to learn many things. Also, if you mess up, and trust me, it will happen at some point. This is a great time to show God's forgiveness, mercy, grace, and love. But most of all, love. So that's it for discipline. The part 3, we will talk about consistency. So be sure to check that out.